My name is Aditi Narayan Minkoff, and I'm the Vice President of Community Support at IMALS. And I am honored to be the moderator for this next panel on removing guilt, finding support, and taking a break. We have an incredible group of panelists for this panel today, and including the lovely Debbie Lauer on Zoom. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about all of our panelists, and then we'll turn it over directly to them to hear from them. So we have Christy Harden. Christy was the primary caretaker for her dear friend Kurt Ewan, who was diagnosed with ALS in February of 2021 and passed in October of 2023. Christy and Kurt met in 2006 and worked together for 11 years at the local college in Orlando, Florida. They remained close friends until his passing. Christy has no formal medical training, but she learned a lot about ALS and the needs of a PALS during her time with Kurt. Christy joined the volunteer team at IMALS in January 2024 and serves as the chair for the Lou Gehrig Day team, co-chair of the Right Stuff team, and serves on the advisory board, community outreach, and the special events team. Who thinks that Christy's not doing enough? We also have the lovely Mary Rebar, and Mary is Care Services Coordinator for ALS Northwest, has worked in 3 states serving people living with ALS, caregivers, and their families since 2007. Mary launched the National Virtual PLS Support Group, and she had the honor of performing the first home visits and support groups with Alaskans living with ALS. On Zoom, we have the wonderful Debbie Lauer. Debbie is an ALS advocate and has been for 17 plus years. Debbie's family has been touched by ALS and FTD for 7 times so far. Her passions are raising awareness about familial ALS and advocating for ALS policy and research dollars. She has met so many incredible people over the years, both those living with ALS and their caregivers, and that's why she is in this fight for the long haul. We also have Adrienne Kenter, Adrienne is a college mentor at the Boys and Girls Club of the West Valley. Adrienne started volunteering at the club in 2008 as a homework helper for elementary school students. In 2015, Adrienne began her work with a high school program as a college mentor, and she has a BA in International Relations, a law degree, and an MBA. On a personal note, Adrienne was married to her wonderful husband, Eric, for 35 years. They have 2 amazing daughters, Nikki and Corinne. Eric was diagnosed with ALS on his birthday in March of 2020, just as the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the world. For the next 3.5 years, with the help of Nikki and Corinne, Adrienne and Eric cared for each other with love, patience, and a sense of humor throughout Eric's long illness. Eric peacefully left this world on August 25th, 2023, but he will remain alive forever in Adrienne, Nikki, and Corinne's hearts. We also have the lovely Dr. Allison Applebaum. She is the founding director of the Caregivers Clinic at Memorial Sloan Kettering. The Caregivers Clinic is the first of its kind and provides targeted psychosocial support to caregivers, family members, and friends of patients receiving cancer care at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. She is also the author of Stand By Me, a guide to navigating modern, meaningful caregiving. Welcome, everybody. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy for her presentation today.
Hello. I'm going to share a little bit about Kurt because getting to know Kurt is getting to know what it was to be his caretaker. He and I, as Aditi said, we met in 2006 and we became very close friends when we worked together at the college in Orlando, Florida. He and I were actually partners in crime for many of our 11 years together that we worked at the college. And I got to know him on a very intimate level in a professional environment. And then obviously, I'll tell you his story and how I became his caretaker. But I wanted to share a poem by George Bernard Shaw that he shared about a month before he passed away that really encapsulates who he was. This is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world would not devote itself to make you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it what I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch while I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to the future generations. So Kurt was, he was a pretty high up in the Valencia Community College world, and he moved to Houston in 2017, where he continued that work as the vice chancellor for the college. He went there with the dream of becoming a college president, and unfortunately the diagnosis took him down a different path, but that didn't stop him from continuing his work and continuing his focus on making sure that the future generations of students had a place to go. So when he was diagnosed on February 24th, 2021, he was in the midst of the ongoing COVID protocols that he was put in charge of. He was also sadly, he was going through a divorce. So things were kind of stress related, and that's what they originally thought was the problem there. So he said that relinquishing his dreams was not easy for him, obviously, but instead he chose to invest in the people who would continue his work. He saw the opportunity for them to continue his legacy, and his journey also led him to explore this idea of authentic vulnerability on a deeper level. And as I've gotten to know some of the other ALS patients that I've become friendly with here, I see the same authentic vulnerability in them. But I also see such a powerful and strong spirit in each and every one of them. And Kurt also shared that coming to HCC was an opportunity for me. Very often when we work in the same place for years, we become typecast. Kurt was a very particular person. He was very concerned with his looks. He was very concerned with how people perceived him, but obviously ALS started to take that from him. So he started to embrace this idea of becoming more authentic, and having ALS allowed him to pursue that in a way he never expected. He said, I'd been toying with his thoughts and reflections on this vulnerable authenticity and authentic vulnerability. And again, that allowed that to emerge in him, ALS did. So he encouraged his coworkers to embrace this notion, even in their healthy selves. He said that their work and their relationships, believing those to be the most important things in their lives, would be the thing that drove them. The Tuesday before he passed, he gathered a group of about 20 of his faculty and staff together to thank them for their hard work working with him. He shared the idea of the pontifex, or those who were members of a council of priests in ancient Rome, also called bridge builders. He shared the idea of being a bridge builder that could carry his work forward and to become the next generation of leaders at the college. He gave each and every one of them a copper pen and encouraged them to use them until they were unrecognizable. He said that each person there held a gift and that he expected them to be shared and used up just as he had been used up. I started to visit Kurt in 2022 while he was still able to walk, cook, drive, and live independently. But later that year, it became painfully obvious to us both that he was losing more and more of his independence and was going to need a trusted friend close by to help him. The decision did not come easy to Kurt because he was very stubborn and he was not quick to give away his independence or to ask for help. In March 2023, with the support of my very loving, kind, and understanding husband, I made a temporary move to Houston and moved in with Kurt as his primary hands-on caregiver. I was his health advocate, and I was also the manager of his care. Though it was hard to watch him decline to the point of 100% dependence, I was blessed to know Kurt on a deeper level. He allowed me to support him and care for him in a way that I was honored to do, in a way that I knew was so hard for him to accept. He never ceased to amaze me, even in the midst of the true nightmare that everyone knows ALS brings. I was constantly amazed at how he could be so wrought with pain and yet so upbeat and focused on his work. I would ask him on those particularly hard days how he did it and how he showed up, literally attending board of trustee meetings and other work events. He was very clear to me that his work at HCC was his top priority and everything else that was challenging in his life was secondary. I saw him handle the growing, everyday, and heartbreaking challenges of ALS with such grace and dignity and without fear. He did an amazing job at masking his pain, so much so that when he finally announced that he was going on FML last September, many of his team members were in complete shock. Above all, Kurt wanted to be remembered as Kurt. He wanted to be visited as Kurt, talked to as Kurt, argued with as Kurt. He was a former priest, so that facilitated a lot of interesting conversations. He did not want to be seen or treated as his diagnosis. He didn't want to be remembered for his ailment. In 2022, he started to gather a group of individuals on Sundays to what we called his walk and roll band. He was in his we called it the Mac Daddy wheelchair. He was in his big deal wheelchair. And we would spend a couple hours just walking, chatting, reminiscing. Sometimes he would give a topic that everybody would talk about, and he would just take turns rolling up next to people and talking, playing music. And he called these visits his mood crack, because he really said being around, I think somebody shared it this morning, having people around you as an ALS patient can uplift you and support you and talk to you like you're still a person was really important to him. And then Kurt and I spent one particular rainy Saturday morning looking through about 200 pictures that he had taken in his younger years. I learned of his days traveling overseas while he was in graduate school, his time studying to become a Catholic priest, his love for fishing and hiking, and his knack for finding the really most amazing bridges. He once shared with me the idea of anticipatory grief and said that living with ALS felt like being in an abusive relationship that took everything away from you. But when he looked at those pictures and told stories about those adventures, I saw the pure joy in his face and that he truly lived his life to the fullest. Kurt refused to endure the debilitating end stages of ALS or subject his loved ones to it. He said in a college-wide speech a month before he passed, "ALS sucks, and I will not let my friends go through the end I know is coming." A friend and fellow caretaker shared this with me. Kurt and I had a conversation about him needing help and not wanting to ask us, his caregivers, to endure the unpleasant ending of the ALS. He kept apologizing for needing this help, and I shared with him that it was a great gift for us to allow us in and to be there for him, to see his struggles, to hold his hand, to assist him. I hope it gave a little peace, and he said thank you, of course. He found himself in a place he had never thought he would be in, which was difficult, but I know he refused to die without believing that the work he had started would continue. I learned in those last few months that love connects us to our friends in a different way than to our family. The chosen love of friendship is the intimacy that allows for sharing the truth, for sharing all parts of life with each other, the good, the bad, the heartache, and the frustrations. It was truly my honor and my privilege to be Kurt's caretaker. Kurt passed away on October 21st, 2023.
Thank you so much for sharing, Christy. And thank you for sharing about Kurt with all of us. Yeah. Next, I'd like to go to Mary.
Hello, I'm Mary Rebar. I am a longtime care services coordinator. I do this work because I lost someone I love to ALS also. I was that caregiver who walked in and stayed in the house while the wife, Camille, went to ALS support group. What I had learned from this family is many people walked out the door when they got the diagnosis of ALS, and I walked in. And I walked in because a friend of mine's family has the familial gene of ALS, and I had heard of it. So that was the beginning of building that bridge of friendship to becoming a caretaker for a caregiver for my friend. So I was so impressed with the ALS Association. They could answer our questions when neurologists couldn't. I started volunteering at the walk. And then I started working for the ALS Association Evergreen chapter in the state of Washington. I opened the University of Washington ALS Clinic and then continued on with working with ALS. And I covered 1/3 of the United States when I worked in Alaska. Now just imagine trying to get a power wheelchair from, let's say, Georgia to Wisconsin. Okay. So a lot of times people don't realize how big the state is. So I did have the privilege of doing the first home visits in the state of Alaska with Becky Moore, the past executive director of Evergreen Chapter, and also support groups. Actually, I think I may have been the first virtual support groups because Alaska is so big. I currently reside in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, a very beautiful place, working for ALS Northwest. Since 2007, I've been in over 1,500 homes, sitting down and talking to people who are diagnosed with ALS. And why I love this community is we look at the whole family and be able to walk with caregivers. The other thing is I'm currently a caregiver for my mom. She doesn't have ALS. I utilize a sliding shower bench multiple times a week, transport wheelchair, four-wheel walker, and I'm a proud driver of an access van. So I definitely understand caregiving. So I wanted to bring in some helpful hints for caregivers. Some of those nuts and bolts that people who work within the clinic may not know about. And so this is really for the caregivers here. One of the first things to know is that there should be 3 phone numbers in a caregiver's phone. The ALS clinic nurse, number 1, right? Everybody as a caregiver knows that. Number 2, who's your care services coordinator? Who can you reach out to and ask those questions that keep you up at night? That burn, like at 2 a.m. you wake up and you're like, I don't know what to do about this. Reach out to them. The third comes under the Affordable Care Act. Under insurance companies, anyone who's been diagnosed with a complex medical illness can request a nurse to help navigate insurance. How many people knew that? So other than Medicare, which is of course the federal program, you can call your insurance company and request that. Isn't that amazing? You could call one number and get to a person who can help you figure out your insurance. So I always bring that up because most people don't know that's available. Okay. So that's hint number 1. The other thing I would say to a partner of a newly diagnosed person with ALS is get in shape. You are going to be an active caregiver in the future. Guess what? Pilates is your friend. Work out. Core is so important. You may be moving your loved one who may be taller than you and may outweigh you. I move someone, my mom's smaller than me, but I move my mom multiple times each week. And I couldn't do it. You have to have a strong core. You've got to have strong shoulder and arm muscles and strong quads. So if you're going to do it, you're laughing, right? Yep. Because all of us who have worked long-term with caregivers know that and I did it as a caregiver, you will do anything to make sure your loved one is safe. And if they're going down, you may try and compensate in a way that's not helpful to you. So get in shape. Okay. The other thing I would say is begin to request help early. In our culture, it is very difficult to ask for help. It is very difficult for someone to say, you know what, I do need your help. So start small. Figure out who your helpers are. I always love my generation. It will be Mr. Rogers. And he always said, find your helpers. Oh, good. I got some thumbs up. Yay. He's like, find the helpers. That's what we need to do. Okay. And that means ask for help in small ways in the beginning. If you know your next door neighbor goes to Costco every single week, great. One of my families I loved, we problem solved this. They bought a gift card for Costco. They put their list of things they needed and put it on a board, clipboard outside their house, their neighbor would run to Costco and do the shopping for them at the same time. Wow, big time saver for that caregiver. But we've got to start small. Hey, could you pick up some coffee I'm from the Northwest. Hey, can you pick up some coffee when you're at the store? We're huge into coffee in the Northwest. So just start asking those little things so it becomes a habit. I would say through our pandemic, we became more isolated and it's so hard to ask for help. The other thing that I would talk about is there are a few things that aren't covered by insurance that should be in every household to help protect the caregiver. The first thing that I would suggest is a transport wheelchair. Have it early, have it in the garage. There will be a wobbly day that comes where that energy conservation needs to happen. That should be the first thing. If someone's saying, what can I do? How can I help? Can you order us a transport wheelchair off of Amazon? You also need to know they come in different sizes. So what would fit me and what would fit Michael are two different wheelchairs. But also know that that should be one of the first things. The second thing that I would suggest is a 5-handled gait belt. Okay. 5-handled gait belt is one that has, looks more like a back support belt, and it's got handles all the way around. Lots of caregivers blow out their wrist as their caregiver goes down if they're using a regular gait belt because they're holding like this. Weak wrist movement. If you're using a 5-handle gait belt, your wrist stays in a strong point of view. And the third, buy that bidet. Okay. It's about dignity. Oh, I got a good hand pump in the back. It's about dignity in the bathroom. Pay that $200 for the drop on top bidet. Bring dignity into the home. The other thing to think about is how to communicate with people of keeping a support group, having friends. Start that early. Start by having barbecues in the summertime. Bring your best friend who's the grill master, put him in charge. Start those wonderful things. One of the great things that I saw was a neighborhood that would do break up in 2 groups. There'd be the sports folks over here watching the Mariner games, and then there'd be people over here watching the comedy. And what I loved about it is it was a mixed group. But they knew they would do it once a month together, and that built a community before they needed the community. So the other thing with the pandemic is we lost the art of inviting people over to our home. That's something what we have to do is starting to open that door and say, please come in and help. So being able to do that will make a huge difference in the end. There are a lot of computer programs out there that can help you design things to get help within your home in a volunteer basis, such as Lots of Helping Hands, Meal Train, all kinds of groups like that. So please know, reach out to a care services coordinator. I run our in-person care groups in Salem, Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, and our virtual caregiver group online for the state of Oregon. One thing that I haven't heard mentioned here is I'd also like to give a shout out to the rural communities. Rural communities can come together beautifully when the information gets out. I had a beautiful situation happen this fall where a farmer said that he got diagnosed with ALS. I live in the grass seed capital of the world. If you have hay fever, don't live there. And 5 combines came one evening and cleared the field. So reach out, talk, make sure that you build your community as a caregiver so it can support you through the whole journey along with your loved one with ALS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was really, really wonderful to get such practical tips. So your experience means a lot to us, and thank you for being here. Yeah. Next, I would like to go to our virtual room. And Debbie, would you like to share?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I wish I could be there in person, but as the topic is caregiving, I am now caregiving to my partner who has been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So we couldn't make it this year. So I'm just so thrilled that you all are here. So over the next couple of minutes, I wanted to share with you, I am ALS asked me to talk about mentoring, and I'm like, oh, it's one of my passions. So, why I wish I had a mentor back when I was caring for my mom. A little bit about my experience becoming a mentor. Talk about I am ALS's amazing peer support program if you're considering getting a mentor or being a mentor. And then, kind of wrap it up with what are the benefits for both mentors and those who are going to be mentored. So, as was shared a little earlier, my family has been impacted by ALS and a FTD 7 times. So my mom was the 4th person diagnosed, kind of right in the middle of those 7, bulbar onset in her case. So we knew what that was about because she had lost 2 sisters to the bulbar onset ALS. During my mom's journey, I was one of her 3 caregivers. And while I saw what 2 of my aunts had gone through and one of my uncles, it was entirely different when I suddenly became the caregiver of someone who I loved so deeply. So, back in 2007, when this happened, when I searched the internet, remember that Google was only like 3 years old at that time. About the only thing that I could find was the ALS Association and a little bit of medical research, not a whole lot more. So because I'm a kind of person that thrives on, getting as much information as I can to help me find solutions, imagine how out of control I felt, not knowing what to expect, and not finding ideas to be able to help my mom. So, it was an isolating experience caring for my mom. The people where I worked didn't understand ALS. My friends didn't have experience with ALS. 2 of my dad's sisters were key to helping me through, the pain and grief of watching my mom decline. But they didn't have experience with ALS either. The ALS was on my mom's side of the family, not my dad's. So you're like, well, you've got your neurologist. Well, my mom's ALS neurologist, he was more interested in research and the fact that we had familial ALS than he was interested in being my mom's doctor, and or answering our questions. So, I continued my search on the internet, for what might help me help my mom. And I found one document that had 2 long appendices where a long study had talked about, the journey of ALS, what kind of symptoms to look for, and what kind of insights, that I might hope to gain from that. I had so many questions that a mentor, a peer mentor, could have helped me with. So I began volunteering with the ALS Association while my mom was living with ALS. And at the same time, I worked for a very large company. And once people began learning about the ALS in our family, I started getting requests from people to mentor them when their person was diagnosed with ALS. Similarly, the ALSA chapter that I was the board chair for, they would have people reach out to me, especially those with familial ALS, to talk with caregivers for, newly diagnosed families. So over the years, I started creating a document that I would use as a growing list of resources for people, everything from the ALS Association website to, the neurologists in the area to the care coordinators, that we were just, hearing about from Mary, to private Facebook groups for ALS support, those kinds of things. And each time I was asked to meet with a family, I would listen to their story, ask them questions, and then afterwards I would share with them kind of a tailored set of resources that might help them. So sometimes those relationships were maybe only a few conversations. Other times it continued through their person's journey with ALS. Every single time it has been rewarding for me. So around about 2 years ago, I started volunteering with I Am ALS when I retired. and I quickly found their peer support program. So if when we're finished here today, you go out and Google I am ALS peer support, the first thing that's going to show up in your browser is their program. And once you go there, you can sign up to either get matched with a mentor or become a mentor. And so when people ask me, why is this program so awesome? Well, it's because both the mentor and the mentee, you get to complete detailed surveys. So I am ALS asks you many questions. What's your relationship to ALS? Is it familial or sporadic? When were you diagnosed? What are your demographics? What kind of interests you in terms of the support you need? How do you prefer to communicate with your mentor? Maybe you just want to text with the person. I've done that once with a person. Maybe you want to email, maybe you want phone calls, sometimes Zoom calls. If you're lucky enough and you live in the same state, maybe even in person. I've done a lot of in person here in Cincinnati. So that mentor-mentee relationship is personalized because I am ALS matches you up. So you can build a relationship and give you the opportunity to talk through so many more things than you might during a support group meeting. And don't get me wrong, I love support group meetings, but that one-on-one support can really help a person out. So for the people who want to be mentors, once you sign up for that, you get a 20+ page handbook, tells you everything about the role, what skills you need, even provides, which I was very impressed by, a self-care worksheet. So I am ALS wants to make sure that as a mentor, you're also taking care of yourself. Because what do we all do as caregivers? We forget to take care of ourselves. So after you sign the participation agreement, you go through training, formal training. And then you get invited to a series of Zoom calls called I Am ALS Mentor Meetup. So that gives you an opportunity to talk to other people who are doing the same thing you're doing, ask for any advice you might need as a mentor, that kind of thing. So this is really a top-notch program. It's an entire end-to-end process. It's not just, hey, I have somebody who wants to talk about ALS. Can you help me out? If you're in a certain state, you want to talk to a man who, because you're a man going through ALS, you want to talk to somebody who's about your same age. They're going to help you figure that out. So it's an amazing process. It's so good that I asked I Am ALS, may I connect you with some people at ALSA so that they could consider a similar program because they don't have this amazing program. So, you may be thinking, well, why am I talking so much about, the mentor part? Because obviously that's the part I know better versus being mentored. But if you are considering asking for a mentor, you can see that the mentor you're going to get through I Am ALS is going to be very well prepared to assist you and work with you. So, I kind of wanted to finish my couple of minutes with, what are the benefits, right? So if I'm going to be mentored, I get to speak with someone who's very well matched with what I suggested matters most to me. If I'm a mentee, I'm not going to feel as isolated or lonely. I'm going to get to talk to somebody who's been through this journey. I'm going to get to build a connection with someone who gets where I am, not just somebody who's empathetic, but someone who gets it. It's going to help you as a mentee, as a caregiver, to understand what you can expect as your person goes through an ALS journey. Those are some pretty amazing things that I did not have, and I sure wish I did, caring for my mom. Benefits for mentors, endorphins, from empathizing with somebody, from actively listening and sharing resources, from providing them with guidance. Endorphins from showing that you care about another human being. Did I mention endorphins? So it's just a great feel-good thing to do, to pass it on to somebody else. So, I just kind of wanted to end with, wherever you are, regardless of where you're at in your ALS journey, consider exploring working with a mentor. This program is the place to help you do that. And if you feel like you're at a place in your journey where you're ready to help somebody else, then consider being a peer mentor. I Am ALS will make sure you're very well prepared. So thank you all so much.
Debbie, thank you so much for being such an incredible mentor to so many people and for just listening. I think that's one of the most beautiful things we can offer each other as humans is to show up and listen to each other. So thank you. I have lots of questions for our panelists, but before we get to those, I would love to hear from Adrienne.
Hi, thank you all so much. I'm so glad that I'm fourth because you guys covered so much. So now I can relax and take the deep breath that Mary told me to take. And I'm just going to talk to you guys about the thing that I thought I was good about, given that I have excess endorphins, as she said, and that was finding happiness throughout the process. So my husband Eric was diagnosed with ALS on March 27th, 2020, which was his 61st birthday. After 3.5 years of living with ALS, Eric left the world about 9 months ago, and I miss him every moment of every day. When he was first diagnosed, right as the COVID pandemic was completely upending our world and we were completely shut in, I was terrified. Every night for the first 2 months after Eric's diagnosis, I would shake and cry in our bed after I was sure that he was sleeping. But what I was terrified of was not so much how he would manage throughout his illness. My mind had actually skipped that part almost entirely and jumped right to the future. How would I manage without him after he was gone? Somehow, I just knew we would be okay throughout his life. I didn't know exactly how he would contend with his illness or with the idea that the partnership we had built over the course of our marriage was certainly going to have to change. But what I can tell you today is that although our life certainly changed when Eric was diagnosed, it did not stop. We did what worked for us, and Eric and I, along with our daughters, who are both here today, Nikki and Corinne are sitting right there, found new ways to take care of and love each other. That is the way I thought about it. We were all caregivers for each other, just in different ways, and all doing what worked for our family. Eric and I learned to live in the present, even as we prepared for the future and treasured our shared past. What I hope to do for everyone today is to invite all of you in a really personal way into the life that Eric and I shared throughout his illness. Luckily, both Eric and I wrote a lot. Informal notes, letters, emails, and texts, and I hope that reading some of these things to all of you will give you a better idea of how Eric and I found small moments of happiness, even in the roughest of times. Since these writings weren't written for today, I think they'll actually give everyone here a look into the ways Eric and I, during his illness, found support and happiness. So first off, in June of 2022, shortly after his diagnosis, I wrote in an email to a friend, "I've had the best life and wouldn't trade places with anyone, even with what the future holds for me." And I really do believe that, and that is what happened. During the last month of Eric's life, when he no longer could get out of bed much, when our present tense became just a bit harder, I started writing him a short note or letter every day with memories from our life together. Eric and I both loved the notes. We laughed, we reminisced, and Eric, with his very focused memory, often corrected my mistakes. The notes were intended to cheer Eric up as he was sick, but they turned out to also be therapy for me. Sometimes I wrote about big things, but more often I wrote to Eric about the little parts of life that are so easy to forget. I went back and reread all 24 notes in preparation for today and realized once again just how many happy memories Eric and I had actually made even after he was diagnosed. I brought just one, while I typed it in, to share with you as an example of both small and large special moments. It's note number 11. It's called Sequoia. "Dear Eric, tonight's little note is different from the first 10 notes I've written to you because it is the first note about a memory we've made since you got sick. I've been thinking a lot about our trip to Sequoia National Park. COVID was still pretty new and there were no vaccinations yet. You could still walk with a cane, and you told me that you wanted to see the giant sequoias while you still could get around. It was a great trip, just the two of us enjoying time in an amazing place. The trees were so beautiful, and I loved seeing you relax and enjoy the beauty of the place. It smelled so good in the park, and it was so quiet and not too busy with people. Of course, the food in the park was barely average, and the hotel was highly mediocre. With that, my favorite memory is us getting a pizza and me bringing it back to our room, where we ate pizza on the bed and watched Law and Order on TV because we couldn't use our computers and there were no cable channels. That was the moment when I knew we were going to find so much happiness, even in a hard time. You and I have had so many adventures and fabulous vacations, the kinds that everyone wants to hear about, but we can also do the simplest things and feel so happy. That's what I love. Love me. So those were the kinds of notes I wrote to him. And we did find daily moments of joy and contentment by focusing on what was possible and what was important to us. What was most important to Eric was connecting with others. He loved people and cherished his friendships, so we made that a priority throughout his illness. Some of my favorite memories, remember this is heavy duty COVID, are of Eric sitting in his wheelchair having weekly, biweekly, and monthly Zooms with his many friends, and he had hundreds of them. As his illness progressed, those Zooms were a lifeline to the social life that Eric needed to be happy. Afterward, he would be exhausted, but also energized by the love he felt from so many people who cared about him and our family. The thousands of texts and emails Eric exchanged with friends, family, and colleagues were equally life-sustaining. In an email he sent in January of 2021, 10 months after his diagnosis, you can really hear his voice and what was important to him. I think this will be especially important, especially helpful to everyone here who is actually living with ALS. Dear Jen, that's the friend, thank you so much for reaching out. You are so sweet and caring, and it means the world to me knowing that you're there. I'm actually doing pretty well these days. The world just feels better, and so do I. I'm learning how to live within my new body these days, and I think that really helps. It's still a work in progress, and it changes pretty regularly, but learning to adjust things to preserve my strength and sanity helps. And I've become much less impatient. It's taken me a while, but I'm pretty comfortable now asking for help for all kinds of little things around the house. Of course, Adrienne has been remarkable. Not really, but that's what he says. She not only does everything for me, but does it with such joy, again, excess serotonin, at the prospect of helping me out, that it makes me acknowledge every day just how lucky I am. I'm approaching a lot of things with a mix of hopeful realism or realistic hopefulness, and I think that's working for me, at least for now. Of course, the whole COVID overlay to my situation makes it especially tough. I'm missing my friends, but comforted knowing that they're there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep the photos and entertaining texts and posts coming. I love you guys. So that's Eric's voice. Another thing that helped me so much throughout Eric's illness is what I call my happiness journal. Just over 12 years ago, so way before ALS, I started a journal where I write a few sentences every day about something happy, good, or positive. Throughout my family's ALS journey, my happiness journal was full of all the ways Eric and I were able to connect with each other, our daughters, our extended family, and our dear friends, all of whom made our lives just a little bit better. Even on the worst of days, I found that there was something or someone good to write about. Some days it was something as simple as a good friend's visit, like this one I found going through my journal, June 20, 2023. I got to spend the whole day at home catching up on things. Danny came over to see Eric. He brought him a Jumbo Juice, and then they watched Curb Your Enthusiasm together. It was great to hear them laughing. Other days, it was a short email from a friend like this one I found last week. Hello, Kentors. Today is a great day. Naturally, I'm referring to the fact that today is National Hugging Day. In honor of that, Karen and I are hereby sending big virtual hugs to both of you. Simple things, catching up on paperwork, TV with a friend, a virtual hug, all small sources of comfort and caring. Those things brought happiness to our lives. Every day throughout his illness, I would look at my handsome husband and tell him, I am so lucky to be married to you. Eric would always smile and say, yes, I'm quite the catch these days. That was Eric. Eric himself was the biggest reason why our family found happiness in the roughest of times. His humor, heart, and ability to keep reaching out as his illness progressed kept us connected to one another and to our community. I remember coming home from work so many days to find Eric sitting on our balcony in his wheelchair, looking out at the ocean he loved so much. This is my forever memory of Eric in his ultimate happy place, an image I'll continue to treasure even as I try to navigate and try to find happiness in these new rough times. So for all of you here today, I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer as to how to live with or after ALS. Eric and I did work for us, given who we were, both physically, right, not so strong, and emotionally, and what was important to each of us and our daughters. I really hope that each of you will do what works best for you. Again, my message is to do what works for you, find the small things that make you feel good. And then here's a little bit of the bossy part. Maybe write down the happy moments so that you'll remember them always. It really is okay to just be you.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, for not only sharing small moments of happiness, but also small acts of happiness and love. And that just means a lot. So thank you. Last but certainly not least, we have Allison.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Adrienne, for sharing that and for all of you on this panel today. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training. And when I came to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in 2010 as a postdoctoral fellow, I was working primarily with patients at end of life. And what was so striking to me about these patients' narratives was, as opposed to focusing on their own mortality, they were focused on their parents, partners, and children, and siblings and friends. They're individuals left in the waiting room and left at home. Individuals who they identified as the linchpin of their care and who would be most deeply impacted by their eventual deaths. I realized back then in 2010, long before the pandemic, that healthcare was dramatically relying on family caregivers to shoulder tremendous responsibilities without actually providing training, education, or support. And despite the fact that the scientific literature had already very much documented the distress experienced by caregivers, there were no targeted support programs for caregivers in any cancer center or hospital in this country. And so in 2011, I founded the Caregivers Clinic at MSK, Memorial Sloan Kettering, whose mission is to assure that no caregiver experiencing significant distress as a result of their critical role goes unidentified and deprived of necessary support. The program was the first of its kind, and my hope is that within the next 15 years, every cancer center and every hospital system has a program for family caregivers. The same year that I founded the Caregivers Clinic, I stepped into my own caregiving journey for my dad, Stan Applebaum, who had Lewy body disease, which is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that leads to fluctuations in autonomic functioning and consciousness. So for him, he would have sudden drops in blood pressure and temperature to near hypothermia levels, and he would hallucinate anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours, occasionally an entire day, and one point an entire week. And I had no idea how long these hallucinations would last, and I experienced each one of them as a mini death. My dad's diagnosis came after he was in a coma due to a medical mistake. I won't go into that right now, but I will say that he never actually recovered physically fully. And from the coma in 2013 until his death in 2019, he was full assist. And my caregiving journey, like for so many of us, was challenged by the nature of our public policy landscape, among many other challenges, but for me personally, the sudden death of my mother 1 year later. So I was very alone in this with trauma and grief. I've written about my caregiving journey and my work as a caregiving scientist in my recent book, Stand By Me, A Guide to Navigating Modern Meaningful Caregiving. The title of the book is in part in honor of my father, who, among other things, was the principal arranger behind Benny King's Stand By Me. My dad was a great musician and an incredibly creative man. What I want to share with you today are three of the most important lessons that I've learned as a result of 15 years as a caregiving scientist and as a family caregiver, though these lessons, actually, everyone else did my job, so they've already been shared with all of you. The first is that we as family caregivers are responsible for sharing our care partner's personhood, for telling their story and making it matter to those who take care of them and making it matter after they are gone. I learned very quickly when my dad was in the coma, and soon after, every time he hallucinated, that without me by his side to serve as his eyes, ears, and voice, there was no way for any members of his medical team to have any idea who Stan Applebaum was and what mattered to him. That without me by his side, he would be labeled as another patient with neurocognitive challenges based on his age. He was born in 1922. A lot of decisions would be made about him. What they did not realize is that when he was not hallucinating, he retained his short-term and long-term memory, his zest for life. He composed music from his hospital bed. And he chose at age 92 to learn Tagalog, the language of his home health aides. This was not a man who wanted to stop growing, but had I not been there, no one would have known that. Whatever form this takes for all of you, this is actually one of the most critical responsibilities we have as caregivers, but it's rarely labeled or identified. And so I want to start labeling it and identifying it for all of us. Second, we all know as caregivers that caregiving is challenging. Distress is something we all experience. I'm a clinical psychologist devoted to addressing mental health challenges in caregivers because we know that diagnostic rates of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and many other things are higher in caregivers than the patients for whom they provide care. So that's all real. But what I want to emphasize right now is that while we certainly don't choose to step into the caregiving role, right? We don't choose to have the person we adore most of this world be diagnosed with ALS or LBD or advanced cancer or anything else, right? But if we are stuck in this situation and we are presented with these emotions, well, let's use them. So the second lesson is that our emotions are messengers and they can teach us how to live our lives more fully. And I want to illustrate this with two emotions that I hear very commonly in my clinical practice, two emotions that often caregivers judge themselves for having. And I'm wondering for those of you who are caregivers, if you find yourselves judging yourself for these. And the first is anger. If you're a caregiver, you have every right to be angry. You have every right to be angry that perhaps your life has been put on hold or your dreams have been deferred and you can't plan for the next year or month or week or day or next hour. That is maddening. And that anger must come out. And I'm not saying go yell at your care partner, but that anger needs to come out. Yell into a pillow, talk to a therapist, talk to your best friend, join a support group, get that anger out. But what's so important here about anger is it's rarely unidimensional. And it is a lot easier for us to express anger than it is to express sadness. And most often, beneath our anger, there is a deep well of sadness. Most often, when we are angry, we are grieving. And I'm not just saying life or death grief, but the grief over a loss of control, grief over not being able to plan. And so I want to encourage each one of you, the next time you feel angry, check in with yourself and ask yourself, what am I grieving? And can you allow yourself to get some of that sadness out? And if you can, you're going to find the anger is going to dissipate. The second emotion I want to talk about is guilt, because it wouldn't be a talk on caregiving if we didn't talk about guilt. This is the most common word I hear every therapy session. So I know my patients feel guilty when I hear the woulda, shoulda, couldas. Dr. Applebaum, I should not be here. I should be at his bedside. Dr. Applebaum, I shouldn't be here. I'm not the patient with cancer. When I hear the woulda, shoulda, couldas, my patients are telling me that they feel like they are about to let someone else down, their care partner in this case. But the reality is that when we feel guilt, it's actually a sign that the person we are letting down is ourselves. It's a beautiful red flag that tells us that we have neglected our own needs. I want you all to chew on this one. When we feel guilt, if we were to continue to do the thing that guilt is telling us to do, we would actually neglect ourselves. And so I encourage everyone, the next time you feel guilt, to ask yourself, in what way are you neglecting your own needs? And in what way can you pivot and go in a different direction and meet those needs? The third and final lesson I wanted to share is one that Adrian just so beautifully illustrated. And that is that despite the suffering that we all experience as family caregivers, caregiving provides us with such an incredible opportunity to connect to meaning and purpose. And I usually preface it, but I don't think I need to with, this is not about the power of positive thinking or turning lemons to lemonade, but I think I don't need to do that right now. But this idea that suffering and meaning can coexist. We can feel sadness and fear and anger and resentment and love and strength and hope and courage. The meaning and the suffering can coexist. The meaning does not take away the suffering, but it certainly can help us to cope. In my book, I go into great detail about routes through which we as caregivers can remain connected to meaning, both while we are in active caregiving roles and after. But I just want to highlight one of them for you right now. And it's something, I wrote down some keywords I heard rewarding, endorphins, connection, contentment, joy, meaning, identity. You guys did my job. So we can connect to meaning through our five senses, through what we see and touch and taste and smell and hear, through a tight handhold or hug, through visions of beauty looking out onto the ocean, through moments of humor. We can feel connected to one another and connected to something greater than ourselves. As caregivers, being able to leave the hospital and feel the sunshine on your skin, or take a sip of your favorite tea when you're stuck in that emergency room and remember what it tasted like, what it was like to taste it the first time you tasted it at your grandmother's house years ago. Or it's about realizing that you've become a different version of yourself and maybe a better version of yourself. I've lost track of the number of caregivers who've said to me, I had no idea I was this strong until I became a caregiver. Or I found my voice because of caregiving. I used to be shy, but I've had to speak up with so many healthcare professionals. I have become outspoken. And certainly I'm Allison 6.0 speaking to you today. Allison 2.0 began her caregiving journey a decade or so ago. So I leave you with that, the hope that everyone in this room, despite the challenges you're facing and will continue to face, the suffering that is so very real, that you are at the same time able to connect to meaning and purpose as you continue on whatever your journey may bring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was really powerful. Well, with that, I want us to open up to questions. And I do have a few questions for our panelists, but I also want to start with seeing whether anyone in the audience has questions too.
I'm curious about the men.
Oh.
I'm so sorry. I didn't see that.
So people here, we got it. We'll go back.
It's all about me. Okay. I'm curious, what's the difference between having a mentor and having a caregiver? Which questions would you ask to one? Which ones would you ask to the other?
Debbie, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the idea of having a peer mentor is for either a person who has ALS or the person's caregiver. So, I was caregiver to my mom and she had the bulbar onset, but I didn't know like what specific things to look for along her journey so that I could see when she was progressing, that kind of thing. If I had had a peer mentor, somebody who'd already lived through the experience of caregiving for another person with bulbar onset, I could have reached out to that mentor and said, hey, I'm seeing my mom, like do this. And what does that mean? Well, I had to read and read and read to find out that what that meant was she was not getting enough oxygen, So a mentor could have told me that. So the idea is it doesn't matter whether you are going through the disease, the illness, cancer, ALS, whatever it might be. You can get somebody who is a mentor for you, somebody you can talk to about deeply personal things because they've gone through it that could help you.
My question is, how do you continue to find support? Like my support is exhausted. I don't have really, I have my home caretaker, but my kids are done. How do you find support outside of that?
Wonderful question and a raw question. So I want to say thank you for being brave and asking it. I run the National PLS Support Group, and this is a question that we definitely talk about, is that people with the long-term form of ALS burn out their church, their friends, their family, and how can they find that support? One of the things that the PLS community talks about in support group is that you have to have that one good anchor friend. And they utilize the word anchor, which I really like, the person who helps pull you back when sometimes you start spinning out. I hope all of you in the room have an anchor friend. but being able to build that in. And then also finding the community that can support you. And so we'll connect for the PLS support group. But anyone who's gone through a long-term illness can relate to what you are feeling. Yes. Other ideas from the panel?
So I was that anchor friend for Kurt. And as I shared before, he was a very private person and it was very hard for him to ask for help. But he saw that I was struggling because I was there for 7 months away from my home, away from my friends, away from my husband. And so he started slowly to allow other people in, a very small group. And I was the person that helped get those people comfortable with him. So, reach out to your other friends and see, even if it's just for a day or a night. And those people became so important to me because that was how we talked a little bit about the guilt that you feel as a caretaker because you get exhausted. I was sad to watch him. I was sad to be away from my husband. So having that opportunity to rely on other people that he trusted to come into the home was really important as well.
Thank you both. I have a question for Allison. I think we could spend a whole session on this, but a lot of times I hear from a lot of caregivers, yes, I'm experiencing an emotion, but I don't have the time to allow myself to feel it. I don't have the time to check in with myself. And sometimes I may have the time, but I really don't want to check in with myself. So what are some tips and advice you would offer to somebody who's having a really hard time connecting with themselves?
Yeah, this is such a great question. So if I tell everyone in this room, do not think about a bright pink elephant. No bright pink elephants for the next no bright pink elephants whatsoever. Silly example, but when we try not to think about something, whether it's a bright pink elephant or the death of the person we love more than anything in this world, that elephant comes back. Avoidance does not work. And so understandably, we as caregivers are overwhelmed. We legitimately don't actually have very much free time in the day, but we do a disservice to ourselves when we make an excuse for not allowing us to express emotions. Whether that is finding 5 extra minutes in the shower at night to allow yourself to cry, getting up 5 extra minutes early in the morning. I'm talking small amounts of time to allow yourself to connect to your emotions. It's so very critical. It's perhaps the most important medicine we have is allowing our emotions out. None of us have a crystal ball. We don't know how long these journeys will be, and we don't know what they're going to bring. But the one thing we know will not help us and actually will harm us is keeping those emotions in. Every emotion we have has a physical component to it. Every emotion we have actually has a thought, a physical feeling, and a behavior. And I mention the physical component because one of the most important things you can also do, and I heard about getting strong and doing Pilates, that's important both for making sure you are strong enough to transfer your care partner, but also because that exercise is going to actually allow you to process your emotions as well. And simply, diaphragmatic breathing. Does everyone know what this is in this room? Taking a deep breath in through your nose, holding it for a few seconds out through your mouth. When you breathe that way, you bring oxygen to your brain and it lowers your stress hormone cortisol. 1 minute of diaphragmatic breathing can lower your stress level. I think what often happens, certainly it happened for me, is I was so stressed that I couldn't connect to my emotions. But if I created just a little bit of space to breathe, I knew that those emotions were going to come up and out. And so I encourage all of you to give yourself permission to carve a few minutes to do some breathing and to allow that elephant in. The reality is that once you do, it's going to soften. The emotions won't be as intense. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm grateful to caregiving is it has taught me certainly, but has taught the thousands of patients I work with to develop the capacity to tolerate emotions. It's a muscle that we can practice. We can learn it as caregivers, and it's going to serve everyone in this room for the rest of your lives.
Thank you so much. I'm curious to hear from eight. Yeah, go
Can I
ahead,
add
Adri.
one quick practical tip? So this was not my idea. It was after Eric died, I was having a lot of trouble sleeping and eating. And sleeping tips didn't work, but what my therapist told me was chew gum. And that will give a signal to your nervous system that it's safe and you'll be able to eat. And I was like, really? Chewing gum? That's something I don't do because I got TMJ from it all those years ago when I was a teenager. But I had, well, probably one of my daughters buy me a pack of gum and I chewed gum and I could eat. So I don't know if it will work for everyone, but that's just, I don't have a lot of practical tips, but that worked for me. And it was something that I would never, ever have thought about. So on kind of an entertaining, practical note, try chewing gum.
Thank you, Adrian. I have a question for you and Christy. How did you both check in with yourselves while you were caregiving?
I'm trying to think. I think what I did was, I'd always kept a journal, just a one line a day journal for all those 12 years. And I think that's how I checked in with myself is when I'd write in my journal, either in the morning or at night, I would, because I'd been keeping it for all those years, I could look back at prior years and I would only allow myself to write good things because I figured I would remember the bad stuff. Like, so I didn't need to write that down. And I think reading prior years was really helpful. And then maybe I'd send a little note to the person. I'd send like a text to one of the girls, oh, this happened, 5 years ago today, or one of my nieces or nephews or a friend. And I think that really helped me to check in and then also focus on, okay, what was good about today? And I think that's probably how I checked in with myself the most was that daily journal writing. So that would be my thought.
So my caretaking started before Kurt. My favorite human on the entire planet passed away in 2022, and my husband and I were also caretakers for him. So I went back to back and losing two very important people in my life. So for me, running was the way that I checked in with myself. I was a runner. Then I went into CrossFit because of Kurt. And so I just made the time, and I am not an early bird, but I would get up between 6 and 6:30 every morning and go for just a 20-minute run, just to check in with my own thoughts, just to recenter. And it goes to the, getting healthy and staying strong. And it just was my time. It was my 20 minutes to just kind of unplug and just refresh myself. And again, because I was away from my family, my husband, my loved ones, it was really hard, but that was the time that I could refocus and say, okay, I'm here for Kurt because he didn't have anybody else. I'm here to help him and support him. And it kept me focused and centered.
Thank you both so much. I think sometimes folks can get a little overwhelmed or intimidated by the thought of journaling. And I love how you've explained it, Adrienne, in terms of it doesn't have to be a long journal entry. It could just be one thing that happened that day. And I think that's really great practical advice. Yeah, of course. Christy.
So Kurt and I, before I moved to Houston, we texted all the time because he was not comfortable on the phone anymore. So since he has passed, I have 124 pages in a document where I still text him like normal, like I would. And that still helps me stay connected to him and connected to our memories. And it's silly little things like, hey, good morning, I'm going to get a coffee or whatever. So I still stay connected. And I think that's how, because we would have hundreds of pages of text between us. So that's how I still today stay grounded with his memory.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Christy. Does anyone else have questions? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for being here. My question is regarding as a child, a young adult child of a caretaking. My dad is battling ALS, and I just recently made the decision to put a pause on my career as a chef and move back home. And I'm wondering about navigating navigating the anticipatory grief in addition to the grief of the life and career that I used to have, and how to not feel selfish about feeling sad about that. Um, and then also how to continue to prioritize him during this transition without losing my sense of self and identity.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It takes a lot of courage to make the decision that you've made. So just want to acknowledge that. It also takes a lot of courage and speaks volumes of your own emotional health to label anticipatory grief. And so the fact that you're acknowledging that there's multiple griefs to process, both the grief, the loss over your budding professional career, and also anticipatory grief for your father, it's just important that you actually are acknowledging that. And so that's the first step. And I think towards what I was speaking about earlier, the more that you can give yourself space for that grief, whether that's with other family members or perhaps with a support group for young adult caregivers. I think particularly for those of us who are young adult caregivers, it can be so beneficial to meet peers because it's so age non-normative to be able to be putting your career on the side to do this. So I encourage you to do that. You know, that word you said, did you say selfish? That goes back to guilt, right? So my response is that is actually your psyche is saying deep down, you know that sadness needs to come out. And in fact, the more you're able to express that, the more present you're going to be with your dad and with others in your family. I often ask caregivers to think of a time before they stepped into the caregiving role and answer the question, who am I? So I want you to do that. You don't have to do it right now. Do that at some point. And I want you to think about your answers to that. And maybe it's roles, maybe there's things you do, things you enjoy, values, activities, etc. And I want you to consider what ways you can reconnect to those parts of yourself despite the changes and challenges and limitations. I'm thinking of someone I used to work with. She loved gardening. She was a big gardener, and that was her way of respite, was to be in the garden. And she came to New York City to take care of her partner. They were in a small apartment in the city, no garden in New York City. But what she did do is she got window plants, and just spending a few minutes with her hands in the earth and repotting the plants, not the same, but reconnected her to that part of herself. And so whatever that means for you, maybe it has to do with cooking, I'm not sure. But I encourage you to think about how you can reconnect to your authentic sense of self, because that's not going away and she's going to come back out.
Thank you so much,
If you
Allison.
don't mind, can I jump in?
Absolutely, Debbie.
One other thought is, you know, in addition to a support group, you know, consider talking to somebody one-on-one. You know, you can talk with a therapist for a while who could help you out. And I know Dr. Applebaum here isn't going to self-promote, so I'll do it for her. This is an amazing book, Stand By Me. It's beautifully written. There's a chapter in here for everybody. I would highly recommend you get that book. Very practical. You know, one of the things I did to care for myself while I was caring for my mom is after she would go to bed at night, I would sit and read for a little while. If you find that you have time, you know, when you get home, you start taking care of your dad, I think you said, get that book and take a read. It'll help you immensely.
Thank you so much,
Aditi,
Debbie.
can I add a little something to
Of
that?
course, Adrian.
So on a really personal note, both my daughters put their lives on hold to a certain extent as well, and they're here today, so you could connect with them. My younger daughter actually was living in New York and actually was starting her dissertation. She actually moved back home, refocused her dissertation out of Los Angeles, worked with me at my job at the Boys and Girls Club so that as my time went down, she picked up so I could continue my job. And then Nikki, my older daughter, was a designer, and we decided to remodel the house. So she put her career on hold and helped me redo the whole house so that it would work for Eric. So if you want to connect with them, as the doctor said, peer support, they were not the sole caretakers, but their job was to help me so I could take care of Eric. So if you want to connect with them after this, I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about kid-related stuff, adult kid.
Well, I didn't really have a question, but I was going to say, like Adrian said, that I know I've talked to several young adults in the course of my time here already who have been going through a similar journey. So I hope that there is a lot of mutual support. And I was wondering, Debbie, is there within the mentor panels, are there young adult mentors, or is that something that would be kind of a like a subgroup that needs to happen to help these many people who are in that situation?
Yeah, I would ask the I am ALS staff. I'm a volunteer, but I would ask a I am ALS staff. Maybe Aditi can answer what age groups you all are able to provide peer mentors for.
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And yes, we do have young adult mentors. So as long as you're 18 and over, you can be a mentor. And that is something that we provide to folks too.
Hi, it's a small room. I don't do I need this. Any case, many of you know me. I'm Lisa. I am a PALS. I am an RN. I'm a nurse educator. I retired last August because I just couldn't keep up. But having said that, I was diagnosed in December of 2020. And like many of you, I'm a freaking nurse. So, well, that's what my neurologist thought. So, like many of you, vague symptoms, dealing with COVID. And I was dealing with COVID on a professional level because was in New York. And no matter what my kids thought, or I'm an educator or in an office, no, we were all at the bedside. And one of the things I learned at the bedside, a real quick tip for caregivers, and you could do this even if you're caring for someone at home, is a simple 8x11 piece of paper, the person's name and a couple of sentences about who they are. When they're not able to communicate, when they have dementia, that's not who they are. It's who they are as you know them. And when I would walk in a room and I'd see this piece of paper, oh, this is Poppy. Oh, he loves jazz music. This is what he looks like without that oxygen mask. Like, it would be like, why doesn't everybody do this? So I know this person as a person. Being a nurse so long, I've done so many things, and it just makes it so personal, because that's, as caregivers and as professionals, that's what we really want to do, connect. And I think I speak for all caregivers and professionals in any setting. And when I was first diagnosed, the neurologist said to me, and again, many of you can, it's so vague symptoms, you're doing EMG, we ruled out everything else. So she said to me, well, you have ALS. And the first thing I thought of course, was how am I going to tell my kids? Not what's going to happen to me, but how am I going to tell my kids? They're going to be devastated. And they were. And then she said, what did you think you had? You can't make this up. You can't. And instead of saying, you need to be at a clinic or whatnot, well, there's some research being done. And what does that tell you? You have no hope. And when, of course, there is hope. And here I am, 3.5 years later. And the other thing I'd like to share with you in terms of who you tell and when you tell, because if you're still working, you don't want people to look at, and you're a nurse and you're dealing with new people. And I dealt with a lot of new nurses, right? And you're the elder nurse, whatever, mentoring, as you said. And you don't want people to see you differently. You don't want the pity party. You want to do the best you can in the professional role you're in. And so it wasn't until a few weeks before I left that I actually started to tell people that I had worked with for a couple of years. And as someone said earlier, and the recurring theme is, everybody's dealing with something. And when I told one person I worked with, she said, I have MS and I don't tell people. I told our lovely secretary who I've worked with for a year and a half, wonderful young woman, 25 years old, just a delight to work with, and smart, capable. And she said, my father had ALS and he passed. And so it's a personal decision when you tell and who you tell. But you're right, in a way, we have to get it out there. And I just kind of wanted to share that practical tip about, we want to know your caregivers. Maybe it's you have a home health aide, but that person needed a night off. You have somebody new, but you want to sleep. So leave that piece of paper where they get to know this person. If your loved one needs to be with strangers, just let them know who they are, not what they can surmise from what they see. If they're non-communicative, their cognitive abilities have diminished. Who are they? They're Poppy, who likes jazz music, whatever it is. So just a very simple tip. Just communicate who they are. A piece of paper stuck to their hospital room wall is more than you can ever imagine, so valuable to people who want to know them. That's enough.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I know we are at time. I want to take a moment to just thank all of our incredible, incredible panelists. Thank you so much for being here and participating today. And I want to wrap with what I'm taking away from each of your panels, and I'm taking away a lot, but a couple things that I jotted down. Christy, thank you for sharing about Kurt's authentic vulnerability and his mood crack. I think it's really important for us to all find our own version of mood crack, right? What are the things that are going to energize you and your soul? Mary, thank you so much for the reminder to start support early. That is so critical. And I think something that we all need to become more comfortable with is we're not in this alone in this thing called life. And let's find our communities. Debbie, thank you for reminding us the importance of listening to the people around us, but also listening to ourselves. And I think that's just really, really a beautiful reminder in terms of creating your own self-care plan, and think about what you need as part of this journey, especially as a caregiver too. Adrienne, thank you for the gift of small happiness, small moments of happiness and small acts of happiness. That is really beautiful. And also about having conversations about your priorities. That is so incredibly important for all of us to have those conversations and not just make assumptions. And Allison, thank you so much for reminding us that we can hold both meaning and suffering. That is a very valuable reminder for all of us. So with that, thank you all so very much. And thank you all for being here today.